Right, so US-backed coups, the interference in another nation's electoral cycle in order to bring about a desired result. It's what the US likes to accuse the likes of Vladimir Putin of, isn't it? Russian interference in Western democracies and all of that. But the US is far from innocent in this regard. The Ukrainian coup in 2014, which in no small part has driven the current conflict between Ukraine and Russia, is one alleged example, Putin notably accusing the US of involvement there. But whether you buy that notion or not, coups with US involvement in, I've discovered this morning, literally have their own Wikipedia page because there have been so many of them. Most recently, the attempts to subvert the election results in Venezuela and the successful deposition of socialist Evo Morales in Bolivia. Well, now the US sees an opportunity to once again interfere in the Middle East, as it has in previous years, such as in Syria, and it very nearly caused civil war in Palestine back in 2007, when it encouraged the Fatah faction of the Palestinian National Authority to attempt to depose the Hamas Prime Minister of Gaza at that point, a certain Ismail Haniyeh, the same man assassinated in Tehran in July, which partly prompted Iran's most recent airstrike on Israel. But in a bid to yet again do despotic Benjamin Netanyahu a favour and give Iran a headache, the US is turning its sights now on Lebanon. Right, so the US planning a coup on another country? Well, I never. As I said in my intro, there have been literally so many instances of this, it literally has its own Wikipedia entry now. A lengthy one at that. So the US have a brass neck to ever accuse other nations of planning coups or to interfere in the electoral process of another country. But they've now hit upon the idea of getting a puppet president, it seems, installed in Lebanon, thanks to that government's ongoing political disarray. Not least exacerbated by the fact they believe Hezbollah are scattered after Israeli rocket attacks, including the assassination of Hezbollah's leader Hassan Nasrallah, and those pager attacks, of course, that they committed, taking out other parts of the Hezbollah leadership they hoped. That, as Israel have learnt to their cost, hasn't necessarily translated down to the front line, of course. And with Hezbollah a political party in Lebanon with 13 seats in the Lebanese parliament, it might not be true there either. Now, as I covered the other day in a video, the Lebanese Foreign Minister Abdallah Rashid Bouhabib had been in the US, and he dropped a bit of a bombshell during a televised interview on PBS with Christiane Amanpour that the Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah had agreed to a 21-day ceasefire, which Lebanon had been told Israel had agreed to as well by the US and France, who had apparently negotiated that deal, only for Israel to then make a complete mockery of its so-called allies by launching their successful assassination attempt of Nasrallah almost immediately afterwards. If I was Lebanon, therefore, I wouldn't care too much about what the US was saying to me, but in talks Bouhabib had with his US counterpart, the push was on that Lebanon elect themselves a new president. Now, Lebanon have been without a president, you might not realise at all, since 2022. The last president was Michel Aoun, who you might have thought could have just perhaps remained in post until a successor was elected if there was a problem with this, but Lebanon's constitution forbids any president from serving 2 consecutive terms. Aoun could return later after somebody else has had a go, or after the 6-year period that a president is elected for has passed, he could come in again, but he's forbidden from doing so concurrently. Therefore, on the eve of the end of his tenure, he literally left his post and went home, and the 2 years on, Lebanon still has no president at all. It's not the first time this has happened either, though. Lebanon had the same problem in 2014, and I think a couple of times before that as well. They couldn't pick a new president, so the post remained vacant until late 2016, which is when Aoun took up the post. There's no such thing as an interim or caretaker president in Lebanon. It's a constitutional issue the country might think about dealing with, really, though they seem to get on fine without it. But it also isn't for anyone else to tell them how to do it either. It's up to them. They went to the US to damn well try. Lebanon picked their president from amongst their current crop of elected representatives, amongst their own MPs in effect. A 2/3 majority across parliament is required, and if they don't get it, they try again until they do, and if they still don't get it, then the post remains vacant for however long it takes until some such time as somebody does. This might seem a little bit odd, you imagine. The head of the lead party, the majority party, would be president or some such, you might think. But it doesn't work like that in Lebanon. Lebanon has a lot of political parties, which often don't really consist of anything more than negotiated electoral lists. No one party, you might not realise, has ever won more than 12.5% of the parliamentary seats, ever. And no coalition in Lebanon's history until 2005 had secured more than 1/3 of the seats in the parliament. So minority coalition governments are the norm in Lebanon. and therefore presidents get elected from amongst parliament as a whole. Now, US outlet Axios claimed that one of the sticking points for electing a replacement president to Michel Aoun had been Hassan Nasrallah. He was solidly behind a candidate called Souleymane Frangieh, but given the nature of the Lebanese parliament and Hezbollah's representation within it, the representation of any party actually within it, it's very hard to see how Nasrallah alone could stymie the election of a new president all on his own. Nevertheless, the narrative now is that with him gone, and the US chatter to the Lebanese delegation in the states present, Lebanon should elect a new president now and are applying pressure to force the point, shall we say. For example, the ongoing exchange of fire between Lebanon and Israel that's been going on since pretty much right after Israel's invasion of Gaza following the night of October 7th had reached such a point that the US attempted to bring forward a diplomatic solution to end the conflict before it got worse. This happened back in June. Now, nothing happened at that point. It was always going to fail to an extent when the US kept on taking the position of, if you go to war fully, we're on Israel's side when talking to Lebanon. It's not really an honest or impartial broker in all of this. Well, now war is all but now happening. The formal announcement is all we're basically missing here between Israel and Lebanon. The Lebanese caretaker prime minister, because they can have one of those, a chap called Najib Mikati, has apparently in the last few days since the assassination of Nasrallah asked Joe Biden's advisor Amos Hochstein that he wanted to move forward with that diplomatic solution proposed in June, only to be told that it is now off the table by the US because matters on the ground have changed. So I thought to myself, well, what exactly has changed? Things have only got worse. A diplomatic solution would still be the answer anyone with the right mind would be wanting to engage in and would work towards. But not now so for the US, it seems, as opportunity has presented itself instead. Hochstein has apparently told Mikati that his priority now should be the election of a new president, and that this election actually should take precedence over any diplomatic solution. The US literally want a new Lebanese president in place before they'll even make any talks about bringing about a ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon now. That's the priorities, and that's what they're trying to put on Lebanon. The relevant paragraph from the Axios coverage of this story reads, the US official said the first priority is electing a Lebanese president, then reaching a diplomatic solution to the conflict at the Israeli-Lebanese border based on a UN resolution that was adopted after the 2006 war in Lebanon but never fully implemented, and then appointing a new Lebanese prime minister. That resolution is, of course, UN Resolution 1701, which calls for a permanent ceasefire and a buffer zone following the 2006 Israel-Lebanon war. The wording of the resolution itself calling for the immediate cessation by Hezbollah of all attacks and the immediate cessation by Israel of all offensive military operations in Lebanon. To my mind, if that resolution has never been fully enforced, it's because Israel, who have quite happily claimed they've been making runs into Lebanon and creating all manner of havoc on and off, certainly over the last year. So electing a new president, though, takes precedence over peace, apparently. It's bonkers, isn't it? Also made clear to Lebanon is the fact that Lebanon should elect a president who represents the majority of Lebanese people and who is not aligned with one team against another, such as the factional nature of the Lebanese parliament, though. With Hezbollah having, in the eyes of the US administration, been hobbled through the loss of Nasrallah, they think they can get someone suitable in post. And of course, any diplomatic solution would tacitly hinge on their sort, the right sort, being the ones that actually get elected. To my mind, the inference there is pretty obvious. But there's a massive, glaring problem with all of this. And with the US having very little control over Netanyahu anymore, it seems, though clearly that doesn't stop them arming him, it's very difficult to see how this could be overcome. Lebanon is being pummeled. 1 million people have been displaced. It's a good job none of them actually have to vote on a new president, really, isn't it? Because it doesn't work like that in Lebanon. But it's very difficult to imagine how their representatives, who do, in the Lebanese parliament, can vote through a presidency when they have their interests of their constituents to represent. They may be fleeing, and this is being foisted on them as a priority by a foreign government who, if push comes to shove, is going to side with their enemies in Israel over them any day of the week. If Hezbollah's choice was Souleymane Frangieh, his opponent, who also narrowly led in the last round of voting, but was nowhere near two-thirds, he only got just over 50% of the vote, is a guy much more US-centric on the face of it, a guy called Jihad Azor. Azor is an economist. He worked in the private sector in consultancies such as PricewaterhouseCoopers and McKinsey and Company. He's got interest in venture capital. He's been an advisor to the International Monetary Fund. He's taught economics at the American University of Beirut. And after all of that, and there's even more, it's not hard to see why the US might heavily favour this guy over Frangier. These are very westernised capitalist entities that this guy Azor has been involved with. But the elephant in the room, though, is still Israel. Would they stop trying to instigate a wider war? Would Lebanon prove to be at risk of civil war again if an ostensibly capitalist-minded, Western-friendly president came in, a US poodle per se, as a result of US interference, rather than someone more independently minded? I see no reason for Lebanon to trust the US here because they are unequivocally on Israel's side. All of this pressure the US is putting on Lebanon is in Israel's interest, not theirs. Though equally, without a president, it does leave the Lebanese government somewhat weakened in theory. So which way will they go? Or will they even go down the road of holding such a vote with so many greater concerns as the attacks from Israel continue? It's a situation to watch. An even bigger question for me, though, is that if the US can spend so much time plotting to take down or replace political leaders in Middle East states, putting their legislatures under pressure to do so, why aren't they starting with the Knesset and Benjamin Netanyahu? Because that makes so much more sense to me. Meanwhile, for more details on that explosive revelation from Lebanon's foreign minister regarding that 21-day ceasefire which they had agreed to, which Hassan Nasrallah had agreed to, and which Netanyahu allegedly broke his word on to deadly consequence, if he ever really agreed to such a ceasefire anyway, I have my doubts. Well, that would mean another fast one being pulled on Lebanon by the US now. Check out this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch to get all the details on that story, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.